Anyone who's paying attention knows that big tech companies like Twitter and Facebook are going out of their way to deplatform certain voices, mostly right-leaning ones. It has become increasingly popular to respond to this trend by calling for these companies to be, quote, treated like publishers, unquote. The problem is that this cure would be worse than the disease.
I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit.
Welcome to the occupation. Hang your collar up inside. Hang your freedom higher.
It's the only way to be sure.
A great deal of our online discourse has congregated on sites like Facebook and Twitter. These platforms are clearly hostile to right-of-center speech. Not only are they becoming more and more obvious about this fact, even as they claim not to be, they're also becoming less and less transparent about their reasons for removing voices that do not reflect the left-wing orthodoxy that dominates their offices. And that is indeed a problem. As Instapundit likes to remind us from time to time, we made a mistake moving in large numbers from independent, self-published blogs to these massive, faceless platforms controlled by people who hate our point of view. But here we are. And it gets worse every day. No person to the right of Joe Biden who has a following of any size can be confident that he or she won't wake up one day and find his or her account suspended or banned, often as not with no actual reason given or specific violation of the terms of service identified. More and more these bans just refer generally to violations of community guidelines or some such, but fail to state exactly what the person did that led to the ban. And just like that, people with tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of followers find their pages or accounts just gone, with no recourse. It's especially egregious when we see a lefty openly calling for a school to be burned down with children inside of it and get, at most, a slap on the wrist, while James Woods gets banned from Twitter for quoting Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'll forego speculating on why these companies seem to be ramping up their efforts to deplatform right-of-center voices of late, but anyone who cares about free speech has to be concerned. The problem, of course, is that these are private companies. If the government were to apply content-based restrictions on our speech, we would have an easy and obvious solution. Not so with a private entity. At its most basic level, they have the right to decide what they will or will not allow on their services. A lot of people have proposed ideas for addressing this issue, but when you break it down, most of them would set precedents that would redound to the detriment of free speech and freedom of association. It is not an easy problem to solve. Perhaps the most common proposal is to treat these companies like publishers so they can be held liable for some of the more outrageous postings they do allow. And it is a seductive idea. The idea is that Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act provides a very broad immunity for content posted by third parties on the Internet. Specifically, it states that no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. It also expressly immunizes actions voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access to or availability of material that the provider or users considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable, whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. Section 230 goes well beyond providing immunity just from defamation claims. It also extends to a wide number of causes of action ranging from negligence to federal civil rights claims. In other words, Section 230's protections are exceptionally broad and are, in the main, a vital part of ensuring the viability of free speech on the Internet. Repealing the statute would be a civil liberties disaster, and make no mistake, implementing this idea would require actually changing the law. A lot of people think it's just a matter of revising how the existing law is applied, but it is not. Most of the people I see proposing something along these lines do not seem to understand that. One argument is that by selectively allowing some content but actively blocking other content, these big tech companies are acting like publishers, not interactive service providers, and have therefore forfeited their immunity. This is contrary to the plain text of the statute that expressly allows good faith content moderation. Some will say that their moderation efforts aren't in good faith and they should be liable based on that. That doesn't work either. So there's a growing movement to get Congress to amend the law to remove this immunity. And as I said, this idea is superficially very attractive. We cannot simply treat these private entities as if they were subject to the same prohibitions as the government, but they become such an integral part of our means of discourse, we rightly believe they must be reined in somehow. But one doesn't have to think very long about it to realize that legislating the boundaries of what is and is not an acceptable level of moderation, or what is or is not good faith, is an effectively impossible task. It's pretty clear that they're well over the line in their current conduct, but where exactly should we draw the line, and what mechanisms should we give individuals to enforce it? I can't see any way to do this that actually protects civil liberties. Remember, these protections don't just apply to big tech. They also apply to bloggers who have comment sections, newsgroup and message board operators and users, and even people who forward emails. There is a vocal minority of objectively fascist people who would be perfectly happy if the government shut down, say, 4chan. But the rest of us know it wouldn't stop with 4chan. Tommy Robinson was never going to be the last person Facebook deplatformed. He was just one they could easily justify in the eyes of the people whose opinions they actually care about. And they've already proven that everyone who said as much at the time was correct. But what happens when we strip away Section 230 immunity and all of a sudden we can get sued just for forwarding an email or because someone posted an off-color joke in our blog comments? No, this is not the answer, nor is bringing antitrust actions to break them up. Even if that were a viable course of action, breaking up Google wouldn't change the types of people who run these companies. It would just spread the problem around some. Another idea is to treat them as public utilities, but that just recasts the legislative problems into a different form. It's one thing to have a board determining whether or not the water company can raise your rates. It's another thing entirely to have that board deciding what speech is or is not acceptable. No, thank you. So at the risk of being called a Pollyanna-ish libertarian, the answer is the same as it has always been: the free market. If you don't approve of Twitter's pseudo-censorship, stop using it and go somewhere else. At the moment, that isn't a great option because not enough normal people are availing themselves of it. As a free speech near-absolutist, I think Gab, for instance, is a great idea. But it currently suffers from the fact that its active user base skews to a demographic that makes it a little too easy for opponents of genuinely free speech to cherry-pick content that's posted there and label it as whatever the fuck alt-right is supposed to mean right now. Gab doesn't affirmatively ban certain types of content, so in our current insane cultural moment, that is characterized as Gab promoting such content. It's absurd, but that's how things are right now. Now, I intend to post this video under the free speech tag on Gab, despite the fact that that forum is currently dominated by anti-Semites. But it will never stop being that way until people come in and push back against it. Speaking of which, if you did in fact find this video on the Gab free speech tag and you are an anti-Semite, I invite you to mute my Gab account. I don't want you as a viewer. More speech is the eternal answer to objectionable speech, not suppressing speech. So if a critical mass of people who aren't assholes move to a site like Gab, Twitter will become irrelevant. Facebook has become nearly ubiquitous, but nothing says it has to stay that way. So no, the solution to tech companies quashing speech they don't like isn't to tear down the law to get to the devil. It's to vote with your feet. Twitter is already failing, and not that slowly. Its daily users and posted tweets numbers have declined dramatically over the last couple of years. Their blatantly selective enforcement of their alleged terms of service is acting to accelerate their decline, not to improve the quality of the service. I have only anecdotal evidence that Facebook use is declining, but even that's starting to pile up enough to start looking like data. The smart thing for Twitter and Facebook to do would be to revise their terms of service to set out clear, unambiguous standards that are not open to subjective interpretation as to what is and isn't allowed, and then promote their mute and block functions to the user base as the primary means of avoiding content users don't want to see. But they're both going further and faster in the other direction. Again, I'm not going to speculate as to why. I'll leave answering that question as an exercise to the viewer. But if we want to change things, we have to participate. As satisfying as it is in the moment to tweet at Jack Dorsey when Twitter makes yet another of its totally unintentional mistakes that always seem to go the same way, it doesn't actually accomplish anything. Only when their shareholders feel the need to hold them accountable will anything change. Taking your business elsewhere is the only way to achieve that.